I'm Dan Lawson, and I'm your host.
I'm Scott Cornell, and I'm your host. And this is a scary movie review. Last week we had a kind of more goofy movie. I would say this week is more serious. Definitely not.
Yeah, it's definitely a strange movie.
Black Sheep. Black Sheep is the film we will be reviewing today, and we're going to get right into this and kind of talk about this film. Actually, before we get into that, I just want to already we've reviewed 2 films. This is the second. Dan, you really love like these undertones of love stories. I'm just putting that out there.
It kind of seems to be the way. And I mean, it's only, I don't know if you can consider 2 to be any sort of pattern, but there is a little bit of Muppet.
It's developing.
There's a little bit of Muppet action in here. I do.
You do love your Muppets. So the Black Sheep, I mean, a quick rundown of the film. Basically a guy that grew up on a farm as a sheep herder, him and his brother. Something bad happens. His father passes away, kind of scares him away from the farm. And then he comes back 15 years later to sign like an agreement with his brother to give up his shares of the farm. So he's kind of trying to disconnect. And he has this really like fear of the sheep because his brother Angus killed one of the sheep.
And Angus was wearing the head of the sheep when he scared him in the barn.
Yeah. And Mrs. Mac, is Mrs. Mac like a caretaker? I guess.
I don't know if it was a caretaker or his mom or.
I don't think it was his mom.
I don't think it was his mom, but.
They called her Mrs. Mac.
Yeah.
So that woman, Mrs. Mac, still present like on the farm with Angus. Right. It's 15 years in the future.
So I was kind of wondering if, and I know a lot of people on the internet have these kind of conspiracy videos where they link 2 movies together. I don't know if you've seen the movie Mary Had a Little Lamb.
I have not.
But it's a horror movie. And it's about this guy who basically wears a sheep head, and he murders all of these people, and it kind of goes down this whole kind of classic slasher film, why this is happening, and it's this weird relationship with his mother. But watching Black Sheep this last time, noticing Angus when he scares Henry wearing the sheep head, instantly tied together this movie and Mary Had a Little Lamb, which maybe we'll review sometime.
Yeah, I've not seen that or even heard of that.
So yeah, I kind of wondered if it might be one of those like, this is the direction that Angus takes in the future, but then after seeing the end of the movie again, Angus doesn't do anything.
No,
he's done.
He definitely he gets bit in a very inappropriate place by offering himself up to his sheep herd,
which is almost like this heroic thing, and then it just all goes sideways.
Take me,
so bad.
Take me. Oh no. So we have this guy coming back to face his past again. Another kind of
another facing your past sort of theme.
Yeah, a theme in these films, and he's facing his past. There's another crew, Grant and Experience, who are these heroic, save the earth type.
Yes.
Spiritual
hippies.
You
just want to say hippie.
Hippies is the word I was looking for, and they're there to infiltrate this facility, this compound that Angus has developed to make, I would say, sustainable food. I think Angus's goal is to be a smart farmer.
Right.
So he's trying to build this and develop the system to grow animals, grow meat, like in a lab. And his scientist, Astral Rush, is her name. She has other ideas, and they don't really go into those ideas too much of what her goal was. She is his assistant, or she's his scientist, developing this sustainable food source. But I believe there was more to that, which they don't explain. I don't know if
she kind of makes this background sort of comment about, you never had any issues with who I was when I did this, and this. And then Angus makes a comment about, well, I don't want to be seen like in public with the likes of you, basically, is what he says.
Yeah. They
So
didn't
you get the
elaborate that.
idea that she's some sort of like mad scientist or she's into some sketchy affairs of some sort.
Yeah, illegal activities.
Right. Which explains further that Angus is, although he's this shifty rich guy trying to genetically engineer these things, he probably had just good intentions on creating a more viable food source or whatever it is. But then she had her own agenda making, I don't know what this was, mutant zombie were sheep,
Yeah.
whatever that was.
Frankensheep,
Frankensheep, yeah.
I think's what they say somewhere in this film. Yeah, the film kind of follows the rules of zombies. Like, if you get bitten, you turn into one.
Right.
You bite someone else, and it's just kind of this quick overtaking of all these sheep becoming zombies.
Right.
And then there's always this big event that's going to happen in these films. So
Oh,
like the
yeah.
big event here is all the investors listening to the pitch of Angus he's going to reveal, called it the old field. So the old field is that super sheep or that lab grown sheep that's going to be the sustainable food source.
Right.
So at this event, they have all these investors from all over the world because he says Guten Tag, he says welcome, he says another language I wasn't familiar with.
Yeah.
But so they're all these investors from all across the world. And at this event is when the show really goes off and these sheep attack all these guys and women and just convert them all into these superhuman, weird sheep hybrid, whatever it is.
And I love the whole in the background, you have that Braveheart like pouring over the hill, kind of coming down into the V in the background. The small details, the small details in this movie is really what made it for me.
The transitions too from Grant specifically, like his transition where he was turning into a sheep slowly, and just the gruesomeness and his characteristics of his face and the way he stands.
They went into such detail. Jonathan King said he was actually heavily inspired by another New Zealander. I don't know if we mentioned that this movie is a New Zealand movie, but he was inspired by Peter Jackson, who was also from New Zealand. In his earlier work, Peter Jackson was very big on practical effects. And so everything that he did in this was all practical effects with the costume slowly building and the mouthpieces for the weird sheep teeth, and all the transformations was all inspired by Peter Jackson's practical effects. And he did it was amazing, like detail in the transformation. The Grant's monster sheep, like were sheep beast, actually had to be operated by 4 people.
Yeah, that thing was huge.
Yeah.
I mean, you could tell.
It wasn't just a guy in a suit. It was actually operated, by like multiple people. And Jonathan King did the sheep noises for it.
So you got to pay attention to those. I didn't even notice the sheep noises. I guess in that fight scene where they're running through kind of the sheep stalls and it's that chase scene. Yeah, there were some interesting sounds.
Yeah.
The sheep were all very entertaining. The sounds they were making, I guess that's something I didn't really pay attention to. It was just there. If I would have known that fact, which I didn't know till you just said that, I probably would have paid attention to that a little bit more.
See, and I learned, as old as I am, I learned just watching this movie that the sheep noises is called bleating.
Bleating?
Like bleat with a T, bleating.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I've always just said like goats and sheep, they neigh, but horses neigh. Yeah. And goats and sheep bleat.
Interesting fact. Fun fact. Yeah, so there's also the idea in this film of balance between meat eaters and non-meat eaters.
Right.
And you kind of see that in Experience, the female character, which also becomes the love interest of Henry. But she's this character that talks about being connected to the earth, being connected, the chakra. She talks about the chakra a lot. And towards the end of the film, you see her then killing sheep with a gun.
Yes.
you see her kind of transitioning into this balance of it's okay in certain scenarios to do certain things.
Right.
And she's giving into that restrictiveness that she's created in her own life. And right at the end, they actually give her the sheep balls to eat.
Yes.
And she spits them out.
The mountain oysters, not knowing what it was. She's like, this is great.
Yeah.
And then he explains to her what it was. Yeah.
And there's also a comment that is said about modern farming. She hands him that organic farm, like turning into an organic farm. And he said, modern farming leads to trouble.
Right.
So that alludes to, as our planet grows and changes, we have to be careful with how much we change and what we experiment with, because you could end up with psycho sheep, possessed sheep.
Well, so go to the underlying meaning of the movie. So when we watched Benny Loves You, it was about having to let go of your past to be able to move forward. So this movie, it was kind of hanging on to your past, because Henry, he uses the trophy of the shears. He keeps using that to kind of give him the strength and the motivation, because that was his father's and that's his past. And he uses that to be able to muster up the courage to fight the sheep and kind of save everyone. And then if you look at also Angus, he threw away all of his father's stuff. He completely cleared the house out of all of his father's stuff. And if he had done more to hang on to his past and respect his father's traditions, none of this would have happened. So it almost has an opposite underlying story than Benny Loves You.
Yeah, I see that. And Angus was a weird dude.
Angus was weird. Well, I mean, he was bestiality weird. I mean,
Exactly.
it wasn't there. It was hinted at strongly in several different places.
They wanted you to know.
They wanted you to know. They wanted, 100%. You were supposed to know.
The point where they go in the office room and he has his pants off.
At the end, it's very blatant.
Yeah. They didn't say it. Something about husbandry.
Yeah.
Is the word they use.
Animal
husbandry.
Yeah, animal husbandry.
That was fantastic. Yeah, so Henry used a lot of his skills from growing up in the film, later in the film, like with the dog. Yeah, so like in the opening scene, he's talking to his dog and he's saying, "Hold on, boy, get down. Hold on, boy, get down." And that was the dog controlling the sheep in the beginning opening scene.
Yeah.
He uses that later to control Angus when Angus is in sheep form, and the dog is assisting him, and then Angus is listening to him as a sheep. And that's where the helicopter comes in and just smashes into Angus.
Yeah.
So the dog is kind of this controller of the sheep, like the sheep herd dog. It kind of has a connection with the sheep, which at the end of the film, there's this weird scene where they show the dog, and then the dog goes bat.
Yeah.
Kind of does
it's that whole weird cliffhanger ending, like we were talking about last time that movies have. They're like, well, does that something?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Did the dog get bitten? Is the dog turning into a sheep?
You're right. Yeah. I mean, you think everything's cleaned up and they're back to normal and they've like rescued the few people that didn't get murdered. And then there's the dog, and then it rolls credits. We'd mentioned before that Holt made the comment that he didn't know if people was going to like Benny Loves You, because he didn't know if different cultures would get the jokes. And when I was watching the scene where, even though Angus was this massive sheep weremonster, he was still afraid of like the little dog would like still like hurt him. And as funny as I thought that was, how much funnier if I was actually in that sheep herder world, if I lived in that community, if I had, like, how much funnier that scene would have been.
Yeah, there's a lot of missed jokes we probably don't get.
Well, and because I've watched this a few times, I think I picked up on more. When Angus breaks into the kitchen with Mrs. Mack, Henry throws a pot at him and she's just like, "My haggis." And he just immediately devours the haggis. Haggis is made of sheep parts.
Mm.
So it's kind of this weird, other than the bestiality in it, it's this kind of weird like cannibal thing. And then when he kind of corners Henry in the closet, or I guess it's a cupboard, he throws mint sauce on him, which is when you prepare lamb chops, you prepare lamb chops with mint sauce. But he throws the mint sauce on him and it like burns him like acid.
Yeah.
So yeah, just all the little tiny little nuances in this movie. And then Experience stabs him in the neck with a chopstick. No, it wasn't Angus. That was Grant. It was Grant he was fighting, because she stabs him in the neck with the chopsticks that like paralyzes him. And way down at the end of the movie, when they're finally rescuing everybody and they have the serum, Grant still has the chopstick in his neck.
Yeah.
I loved that they paid attention to like little details like that throughout the entire movie.
So Tucker is another character that's in this film. That's Henry's friend. I don't know if it was his friend from childhood. It might have been the guy out on the farm in the beginning. I think there are 2 kids running around. I might be totally wrong. But Tucker's his friend.
Mm-hmm.
You could tell they had a really long relationship together. And Tucker's trying to get him to come back and, work on the farm and get back into it. And Henry doesn't want anything to do with the farm. Henry's battling with his demons of ovinophobia.
Mm-hmm.
So arenophobia is an irrational fear of sheeps.
Interesting.
Or sheep. So sheeps. So arenophobia is an irrational fear of sheep. So I don't know if he's self-diagnosed. He's constantly trying to call his therapist and get help through all these scenarios, but he has no cell signal out on the farm. He's out there alone battling his own demons, which is this irrational fear of sheep, which is then rationalized by the sheep turning into monsters.
Which is actually illustrated in a scene when she's like, "What's that?" And he's like, "It's an irrational fear of this happening."
Yeah.
And it's happening.
So it's a real fear.
So it's kind of, right. But he still calls it an irrational fear of this happening.
Yes.
So
one of my favorite scenes is where he puts the sheep chair, or it's from the car. He gets like the sheep cover and he puts it on his back and he's crawling through the field with all the other sheep, just murdering people. Like they're just eating people and just killing people. And he's telling himself, "I am a sheep. I am a sheep." And I really enjoyed that.
Like he's trying to like manifest it.
Yeah. He's trying to speak it into existence, which Experience, the female love interest, she also talks things into reality.
Right.
Like, you are connected to the earth. You are this. And Henry then uses that on her later when she's kind of having this breakdown. And I thought that was kind of cool because we do that a lot to each other, where we tell each other these sayings, or we say things over and over and we speak it into existence. And I thought that was kind of neat how he was doing that to himself.
Right.
Like he had learned that process in a short period of time, but he learned that process and he's saying, "I am a sheep, I am a sheep." And then the wool gets pulling off his back and he actually is accepted by the sheep because he has a sheep. He was bitten by the sheep.
So he's like a were-sheep at this point. He just hasn't turned yet.
He hasn't turned yet. And he realizes kind of his power at that point of the sheep empowering him. And the fear goes away. Like, you don't see it after that point anymore. He was afraid of the sheep, and then he no longer fears the sheep and kind of cured himself in this process. So Grant was one of the first people that was bitten by your favorite character in the film.
The baby puppet sheep fetus is absolutely my favorite character in the entire movie.
Short-lived, though.
Short-lived, unfortunately, but absolutely adorable and horribly disgusting at the same time. It's all I don't know.
It's just fantastic.
It's fantastic.
And when I say short-lived, I mean it didn't get a lot of screen time.
It didn't.
Like that had to cost a lot of money to make that nasty-looking baby sheep.
Right.
And they didn't use it enough.
And that's kind of a theme throughout the movie, the amount of work that they put into these tiny little scenes, like the sheep driving the truck off the cliff.
Yeah.
It's maybe 15, 20 seconds of footage of a sheep behind the wheel of a truck. Took them 7 days to film that scene. And it's 15 seconds.
That's wild.
It is. It just shows the love and the quality of these movies, that they're willing to put in so much work and so much time and money and detail into the tiniest little flavor.
And a lot of those little things get overseen or missed. Like that detail, you looked it up online. If you didn't know that and you were watching that scene, you'd just be like, "Oh, that was kind of interesting." And then you move on.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. There's a sheep driving.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you look it up, and you see, it gives so much more credit to that scene. You're
Yeah.
able to enjoy it so much more just knowing these things.
Yeah, I went back and watched that scene after you mentioned that. I kind of respected it more. It
Yeah.
became more valuable than it was in the moment. And knowing how much time and effort they put into that kind of gave me more respect for it.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what I hope we can do here, is just offer up some of these little tidbits. So when people do go, not only just have good movie recommendations, but when people do finally sit down to watch these movies, having more insight and maybe just growing a little bit more appreciation for the amount of work that these people do put into some of these movies.
So you mentioned this film was shot in New Zealand and filmed in New Zealand. I thought it was fun too that they threw some New Zealand vocabulary in there.
Yes.
The oi. And then bugger me. He said
Yeah.
the bugger. Like that was
Yeah.
fun.
And when he's going down, when Angus is giving the speech to all of the people and he's like saying like good day in all the different languages, like you were saying, it actually abbreviates and it says good day.
Good day.
It's not even good day. It's just a good day.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned that too, I had to watch it with subtitles on because that was challenging for me understanding them. So I threw the subtitles on for the whole film. And bloody, they say bloody a lot.
Yeah.
And then we go back to this undertone of save the earth, global warming, and the methane gas that these animals produce, which is how they kill most of the sheep.
Which is basically what saves the day, is what's supposed to be destroying the day.
Yep. So all the farts, the farts are kind of this funny humor they throw in often with the sheep farting. And then they take a lighter and throw it into this giant crowd of sheep with Angus kind of in the middle of it, getting his privates ripped off by one sheep. And everything explodes, and the explosion's great. It's like from a Die Hard film, just this crazy over-the-top explosion. I loved it.
So in this movie, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a scene, I believe it's when it's one of the scenes, I think, where they're escaping the car. There's the Wilhelm scream. Are you familiar with the Wilhelm scream?
I am. They used it.
So they used the Wilhelm scream in this movie. If you don't know what the Wilhelm scream is, you have to look it up. It's appeared in over 400 movies, including Aladdin, Toy Story. It was in one of the Marvin the Martian movies, 5 or 6 of the Star Wars movies. It was in Spider-Man. It's been in several of the Lord of the Rings movies, The Incredibles. It was in Wallace and Gromit. So it's been in over 400 movies, and they actually used the Wilhelm scream in this movie, which, to me, I kind of nerded out on a little bit when I heard that.
It's a little Easter egg. That's a good Easter egg.
It is.
That's a fun one to find.
That's always which being in 400 movies, you think it would be so prevalent, but 400 movies is really just a tiny drop in the pond with the amount of movies that are out.
I need to go back and find it. You said which scene is it?
When all the sheep are attacking, I believe it's one of the guys. He's like in the car. He's like in a car, and like the sheep is trying to attack the side of the car. So another one of those fun little things that you don't realize watching it, that after you kind of appreciate when you see it. One of the investors gets his leg bitten off by a sheep, and I think he takes his leg and then throws it at the sheep. That guy's actually an amputee.
Yeah.
And
I thought that was an over-the-top scene, too.
It was so over-the-top and just almost like trauma ridiculous.
Yes.
And that's why. Is because the guy was actually an amputee, so they really had to like beef up that scene just to give that guy props.
That is fantastic. Another kind of Easter egg in the film I really enjoyed is when Grant and Experience are running from the scientist. When Grant grabs the vial of this ooze, kind of Ninja Turtle ooze, and he's running.
It has the little baby fetus,
the little
fetus puppet.
Baby sheep fetus. And he says something on the lines of, "Don't worry, they can't catch us. They're meat eaters."
Yeah.
And he's kind of like jabbing at meat eaters. I really like that. And then he's running and he trips and cracks open that vial of ooze. And that's the kickoff to this insanity.
Right. And the little puppet kind of crawls up over his shoulder.
Just takes his ear off.
Yeah.
It's nasty. And then speaking of that ooze, one of the scenes in the film that probably the only scene in the whole movie that kind of made me uncomfortable in like a scary movie sense is when they fall down in that pit.
Oh, the pit was horrible though.
Where they poured all the ooze and all this extra stuff and dead.
Like the biohazard nasty parts.
Yeah, just the nastiness. I could smell that scene.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just disturbing.
And then the sound.
Yeah.
The sound of them like sloshing around in parts.
Yep. It was disturbing. And then Experience has a candle, an aromatherapy candle. And again, kind of highlighting the hippie in her. Like, oh, I'm gonna clear this bad mojo in the room. I'm gonna clear it with this candle.
Yeah, she's gonna like recenter her hormones or something.
Recenter her hormones, yeah. And this smell, like I could smell it through the TV. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I thought that was another just kind of a good scene. That was a very good scene where they put the viewer in that experience because we all know what like old meat smells like.
Oh yeah.
And that was like times 1,000.
Yeah. Yeah, there was another because I kind of feel like, and I don't know specifically any New Zealanders. So I don't know if it's New Zealand in general or if it's Jonathon King, but he really does seem to keep gut punching like the whole hippie mentality with like the candle being in this all this like bio waste. And she's like, I need to recenter my hormones. And when she finally is confronted with Grant, who's now this sheep monster, and he's like covered in blood, and he ate a living bunny, and she's like, Grant, have you been eating meat?
Yeah.
She's like, was it at least organic?
Yes. Like, what the heck? Yeah. They did that a lot with her. They kind of took her out of the moment and gave her this other perspective of the whole scenario and kind of made you think differently about everything.
Yes.
A little over the top. Purposely done.
Purposely over the top. But that's the reason I was saying, I'm like, I don't know if it's a New Zealand thing or if it's a Jonathon King, his personality itself, but it's very evident that tree huggers are kind of frowned upon in this environment. Even the evil scientist lady says, she's like, you can't even turn around without them questioning what you're doing, or however she words it. But yeah, she questions the whole thing as well.
So this won a few awards too at film festivals too.
Yes, they actually won the Golden Trailer Award, the New Zealand Film and TV Award, the Narise Award, and then there's two other awards that I can't even pronounce that they won as well, which was fantastic.
Go ahead and Google those.
And yeah, I did at one point, and I was like, I don't know that I can spell this even, so I could. But it was 5 awards, and oddly, with all of this, all the awards they won, and all the time that's put into the little details we were talking about, and like I was saying, maybe it has to do with people in America not really being able to associate with like sheep herding or New Zealand. Maybe that's why, but in the US, it only grossed like $84,000. But worldwide, grossed $5 million.
That's pretty good for a film of this caliber.
Right.
It's very good. And when you told me to watch this film, Black Sheep, my mind went straight to Chris Farley.
Right. This actually came out 10 years after Chris Farley's Black Sheep.
Yeah. Totally different movie.
Totally. Everything about it, 100% a different movie.
2006 is when this movie came out. So when you're searching for it, make sure you search Black Sheep 2006 to find this exact version that we watched. So the tagline for this film is, there are 40 million sheep in New Zealand and they're pissed off. That's the tagline.
Absolutely. It is not the movie cover with Chris Farley hanging, but there's a herd of sheep with a blue car with the 3 main characters, Tucker, Henry, and Experience, inside of this blue car, and there's a sheep on top of the car howling at the moon. You've got the movie.
You've got the right film. Just go down to your local Blockbuster.
Right.
In the B section.
How many people are going to know Blockbuster?
Oh, man. Not many, sadly. Just us. All right, so let's kind of get into the part of this episode where we talk about the scoring system. The underlying story or meaning of this movie, I think you already nailed it earlier when you were talking about confronting your past, dealing with the things that scare you, the things that kind of hold you back, but also using those experiences to help you through the future.
Right.
So Henry used a lot of what he knew about the sheep, what he knew about their weaknesses. And he was a farmer at heart.
Right.
And he never lost that. So I think that's what the underlining meaning of this whole film kind of is.
Yeah, I think like on the surface, it has that element of don't mess with nature because things go bad. But then on the opposite of that, when they were messing with nature, things was going fine until they tried to stop messing with progress. But I think that was kind of the surface story. I really do believe that like the underlying story is definitely about resorting to your past.
Sheep are bad.
Sheep are bad.
That's the underlining story for me. Sheep are bad.
Yep.
So the acting and characters in this film, I really enjoyed. Like, I liked Henry's kind of calmness. Like, he was obviously afraid of sheep, but he just seemed like a calm guy. Like, he's a cool and kind of controlled guy. He didn't lose his emotions and go crazy. He was just kind of always at this monotone level.
Even in his fear, there was still kind of, he didn't freak out and panic. It wasn't over the top. It was just kind of like, he just kind of like froze.
And his brother and him still had that hate for one another, even though they both were turning into sheep. They still had that brotherly fighting towards the end, where all the other animals or all the other characters that were bitten were all part of like this sheep nation, like the monsters, the werewolves. But the brothers still had that tension and hate and were fighting each other, even though they both were bitten. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. It really did. The movie in general really did have great character development throughout all of the characters.
Fun characters, definitely, too.
Yeah.
Like Experience and Grant, I like that dynamic. Like, she was going to break up with him at one point.
Yeah.
And that kind of follows through to the end. And then they're done when he turns back into a human.
And then you have Tucker, who's the side character, but he's really kind of the cement for everyone's character.
Yep.
He kind of cements all of their different personalities.
Yeah, and he's the one that saves the day in the end with the antidote. He turns everybody back into humans.
Yeah.
So I would really say character-wise, I would give this maybe like an 8 out of 10. Good character development.
I
didn't love them. I didn't hate them, but they're memorable.
Yeah. Yeah, I would rate the production value pretty high for being a New Zealand movie. And it's kind of, I don't know if it's necessarily an independent movie. I'm not sure who produced it. But the cinematography, the special effects, being the special effects were all practical effects, which I really do enjoy the art of practical effects. They did such an amazing job. Everything is so detailed. It's not just a guy putting on a suit. There was a slow development of the characters slowly forming into these sheep. Although there's the weird thing where they kind of have the time lapse with shaking the head and it kind of like turns into the different. But that's all. I mean, you can do all that through editing. But I would really, production value, I don't know if there was any scene that was just like, that's kind of lame.
Yeah.
Like the detail went into the teeth and the hair and the eyes and the mucusy film.
Yeah.
However you would call that. So I'm putting production value at like 9.
I would agree. They did definitely attention to detail. Even like Tucker, when he was transforming and they took his boot off and like his hoof foot.
Yeah.
Like it looked good. Like
It did.
They really put some time into these props.
Absolutely.
Really enjoyed that. I would also give it a 9. So originality of the plot. This one followed really like a Night of the Living Dead, kind of the zombies.
Very much. Very much.
I'd say it wasn't that original in that sense. Throwing it on sheep and making sheep attack each other. I guess that was a novel idea. I've never seen anything like this.
Which Jonathan King said he particularly sought out what was the most mild, timid animal that he could use to be a violent predator. It's sheep.
Sheep. See, and that's where I don't know enough about sheep in general. Like you were saying earlier, if we were farmers or from New Zealand where maybe sheep roam freely almost, maybe it would have hit home better.
Right.
Knowing that sheep are so innocent and mild animals. Every time I've seen like a sheep is at a farm.
Yeah. You're city folk.
I'm city folk.
Yeah.
I'm not petting a sheep every weekend. I don't know how nice they are. So I would say originality of the plot, I'd probably give it like a 6 or a 7.
Yeah.
It's a little,
I think
little
that's
low,
fair.
but
yeah, the sheep thing's kind of original, but the overall premise, it's a little done.
yeah,
I agree.
But I don't mind it.
No, not at all.
I will
Not
always
at all.
watch more of that.
Absolutely.
They also followed a rule that The Walking Dead follows, that if you have the costume, like where he puts on that sheep costume, the zombies won't mess with you.
Right. Yeah. They do kind of recycle those like elements of like, oh, I've seen this in movies, so this will work.
Yep. It was good.
So I do think this movie, even with kind of having been done in different venues with different animals and humans and zombies and kind of going through this sort of pattern, I did think it was kind of an impactful movie just because, for one, with the great attention to detail, with all the practical effects, but also with the ridiculousness of it being sheep and being so horribly aggressive, and some of just, I don't want to say gore, but the biopit, just all of those scenes and the sounds that went with everything. The sound played a really big part. It was it wasn't evident to the point where it was like obnoxious or in your face, but all of like the sheep like eating on people and the crunching and the slopping around and all the parts in the pit, sound really played a big part in this. It's a movie that I'm definitely going to recommend to anybody who's has that comedy horror desire for a movie. This is definitely a go-to for me. I'm going to say, to recommend it with its impactfulness, to recommend to a friend, I'm going to say a 10, because this is a movie that I'm always going to recommend comedy horror fans watch this.
You look at your audience, like you're talking to a friend, if they liked films like, I'm going to bring Shaun of the Dead again, which we talked about last time. I think it's just one of those goofy films that you can enjoy. Doesn't take a lot of energy or effort to enjoy. You just throw it on,
right?
Start watching, and you're laughing and giggling, and kind of just, you get sucked into this film really quickly.
Absolutely. And the movie is what it needs to be. It's not anything really more than that, and it's not any less than that. The movie's just what the movie needs to be.
Yep. When it was over, I wasn't craving more. I had enough.
Right.
And I would definitely recommend it to other people too. I'd probably say a 9 or a 10 also. A really high score. If you want to prepare for our next week's episode, make sure you watch Happy Birthday to Me. It's a film from 1981.
And this was actually our first requested movie review. If you have a movie you would like us to review, please email us ascarymoviereview@gmail.com or follow us on Facebook and send us a DM.
Yep. We'd love to hear from you guys. We look forward to seeing your feedback. Make sure you post, like, subscribe, let us know how we're doing. And if there's anything, like Dan was saying, we could review for you guys, please let us know. I'm Scott Cornell.
And I'm Dan Lawson. This has been a Scary Movie Review. Until next time.
Stay horrible.